I love when movies make me feel things, and for me, the strongest of those feelings is sadness. So when a movie manages to evoke that powerful emotion in me, there's got to be something special about it, because that doesn't happen every day. Now, Aftersun not only had me in tears when I was watching, but it also lingered in my mind and had me painfully think about it for long. It's a movie that brilliantly utilizes elements of filmmaking not only just to tell its story, but to also communicate the emotions, the feelings that naturally overtake us when the images like the ones we've seen in the film are summoned up in our mind. And that's what makes it an experience instead of just a story. And so it's only natural that we form a genuine connection with its characters and end up strongly feeling for them by the end. It is not an easy task to achieve that kind of result with a story that only revolves around a father and his daughter during that one summer vacation they had, with a plot that doesn't fit a conventional narrative structure. Yet Charlotte Wells still managed to do this, with her debut movie at that, so it's worth exploring how she could pull it all off this well. That's what I will be delving into in this video. If you haven't watched Aftersun, this is your spoiler warning. To understand why Aftersun is that compelling, we should first look into its first layer, the way it looks. The movie is a collection of memories that Sophie had of her father, some of which we see directly in the form of an old camera footage. The rest we see either through the perspective of Sophie or an objective recounting of what actually happened for the scenes with Calum. Either way, the director, cinematographer, and editor did a terrific job capturing the feeling that what we saw were actual memories. Part of that is physical, meaning the setting, the costumes, and every device that helped establish the time during which these memories were taking place, and set it apart from the present day. A lot of it, though, was thanks to how the movie was edited and put together. I cannot entirely explain how, but only a few minutes into this movie managed to evoke in me the feeling I get with my own memories. And it wasn't just any feeling. It was that bittersweet, kind of nostalgic feeling where you long for a happy time that you still look back to with that odd sense of tragedy. It was also something about the ambient music, the very pronounced sounds that come with every scene, and the varying time it spends with each of them, that established the proper mood and made of this a vivid and immersive experience. Very early on in the movie, there is this memorable long shot where Sophie was sleeping and Calum was smoking on the balcony. During that scene, you could hear the night crickets and Sophie's gentle breathing sounds as Calum was having his moment, and it all felt so tender and peaceful, and more importantly, immersive. That was the moment I got fully pulled into this movie. Now, when we take a broader look, the way those scenes were put together had its contribution as well. The editing made it so the collection of these memories makes them feel fractured enough through the order in which they were placed, where they cut, and the transitions, so we can get a more genuine experience of a memory. But overall, this movie just looks so good. There are several shots and scenes that are stunning, and they do serve the narrative perfectly. As we can see from the scene at the rave, Calum swimming in the beach that was exceptionally dark, only to also enter this dark room by the end in the final scene, that was Chef's Kiss, and there are more and more scenes that are equally significant. But I think my favorite, and the most powerful and heartbreaking scene, is the one where they are in two separate rooms, where you can see the contrast through the wall between two different images through lightning that reflects where these two characters were mentally. That scene was just wow. I would still like to note that, even without context, you could look at the screen caps and tell that this film is so visually well made. That's partially how I ended up watching it in the first place. There are too many shots that are simply perfect. Those visuals were coupled with a narrative that was meticulously put together. The pace at which we learn the story, get to know the characters, and get exposed to their backgrounds was just about perfect. The movie takes its time to set the moods and the environment, and then slowly and gradually reveals elements of the story that help us build a clearer picture. We start by learning that the atmosphere is filled with a sense of sadness despite the healthy and wholesome relationship this father and his daughter had. We understand that sense as soon as we learn that the parents are divorced, and the time Sophie and Calum were spending together was temporary. After that, we dive a little deeper and start wondering whether this vacation feels that tragic because this would be their last one. What I loved about this film is how it was so subtle about that. There were signs and hints that Calum was suffering, and that this whole story was leading up to him ending his life, but the revealing of those hints was gradual and went from the subtle, so subtle that some of the hints were only clear to me after watching it for the second time, and then to the more obvious, where no doubt remains about what was happening. This choice of pacing added a sense of discomfort and even terror, especially since both the painful realization and the heartwarming connection we form with the characters were growing at the same time. In addition to pacing, this film utilizes perspective. Since a good portion of the movie is experienced with the point of view of Sophie, it makes it so authentic that the signs of Calum suffering with his mental illness were very subtle. We were in Sophie's shoes in this case, and so it only makes sense that we too miss the signs, and only realize they were there after we revisit the movie. Quite literally, in the same way, Sophie is revisiting her memories, which she perceives under a different light after her father's death. This is what I mean when I say this movie was a truly heartfelt experience. One only feels so strongly towards it because it did such a fabulous job translating this character's memories in all their dimensions to the audience. The feeling gets even more powerful when you learn that a lot of what you see in this movie is indeed inspired and taken from the director's memories. While we don't know for sure about the whole story, Charlotte Wells did confirm that photographs from her own family vacations are what inspired an important portion of this film. Aftersun breaks the viewer because it spends a tremendous amount of time establishing and building an equally powerful dynamic between Sophie and Calum. That way, when it breaks that relationship and separates them by the end, it hits the hardest. So a lot of it goes to how powerful the characterization and the interactions between these characters were. First, it was an admirable relationship. Both actors did an amazing job communicating how much Sophie and Calum loved and cared for each other. Their body language, every interaction they had, every gesture they did, all contributed to painting that lovely picture of a father-daughter relationship. The bond between them was so strong that it contaminates the viewer and they end up connecting with them deeply. Part of that is also because of how genuine of a relationship it was. These two characters shared moments that ranged from the most intimate to the most random stuff you could ever think of. There was also a very inspiring genuineness between the characters themselves. It is very hard not to smile when we hear Calum talking so honestly and comfortably to Sophie about his relationships and crushes, while insisting that she similarly shares with him the same kinds of experiences she could have in the future. And you can feel the sincerity of that when you see how Sophie doesn't hesitate to tell him about her first kiss with a boy. Their whole relationship was heartwarmingly powerful on so many different levels. Now, as the film gradually establishes that, it simultaneously instills fear in the viewer by slowly planting elements of foreshadowing. So as beautiful as this relationship might feel to you, you know for sure that it's going to end tragically. It starts with very subtle hints that you can easily miss, like Calum being indifferent to the fact that he was almost hit by a bus, or not worrying about scuba diving without a license, or awkwardly refusing to answer the question, when you were 11, what did you think you would be doing now? That's a question that is introduced at the very beginning of the movie, having barely any significance to us. It resurfaces later on and gains a lot more meaning, but with a little bit of uncertainty. Finally, when I rewatched the film and heard the question again for the third time, I couldn't help but tear up, and that's when it hit the hardest. The signs get less subtle as we go. We see hints of Calum self-harming, or that's at least what I thought myself. See, that's why I'm saying it's all so subtle, because you cannot tell for sure. And then we hear him say that he can't see himself at the age of 40. While that was a sign that is very hard to miss, you can still continue watching the movie with the hope that that view would change. But it gets only worse. At some point, we get misled to think he ends up committing suicide by drowning himself in the beach, in the series of this film trying to play with our feelings. So we cling to the hope of recovery one last time, before Sophie gets everyone to sing him happy birthday, only for that scene to fade into him sobbing in the next one, followed by a shot of the letter he planned on leaving her, which confirmed for good what will happen to him. From that moment on, we see in Calum someone who has completely given up. Prior to that, we could see his scattered attempts to fight and survive. We see him keeping books about meditation and Tai Chi, and promising Sophie a future that seemed to involve them together. A room painted yellow for when she comes by, for instance. He teaches her how to defend herself, warns her about the dangers of smoking, and asks her to tell him her secrets when she grows up. I struggled as to whether I should have considered these as signs of him still wrestling with his suicidal thoughts to survive, and therefore kind of envision a future where he stays and survives, or him simply fulfilling his duty as a father to Sophie until the last moment of his life. Either way, I think that this is how this movie manages to break the audience one last time. It was extremely painful to see Calum slowly shifting from a state where he was struggling to one where he accepted his defeat and experienced his last moment of life so carefree. The best illustration of that is how he seemed to be broken when he could barely afford that rug, which he ended up purchasing, but only with a strong feeling of pain and guilt. In the last few scenes, however, we get the total opposite of that. Calum accepts to take a photo with Sophie without any hesitance, with complete disregard to its expensive price. And that perfectly shows that he has given up. He doesn't care about the expensive price and will spend that money regardless because he doesn't envision himself to live anymore. And when I realized that, it hit really hard. He then proceeds to share his last dance, the last pure and happy moment of his life with Sophie. That's where the movie peaks, and that's when it ripped me apart. We then see the last camera footage Calum took of Sophie as she was departing at the airport. We jump back to the present day. We meet adult Sophie in her apartment with the rug that her father bought, which confirms his death. The last scene was him disappearing into this dark space, and I think it was the rave we keep seeing throughout the movie, and which probably symbolizes him committing suicide. The movie wraps up on that heart-wrenching, yet beautiful note. It's beautiful in the sense that it was perfectly delivered. It was made with so much passion that I couldn't but feel it on a spiritual level. In my eyes, it was complete. I know this video had been nothing but me praising the movie, and that's because A, I appreciate it as it is and I'm satisfied with it on all levels, and B, I'm not even trying to give it an quote-unquote objective review. This was my sincere love letter to Aftersun.